This lesson is use properties to hold data in your classes. The objectives for this lesson are to learn about simple property declarations, full property declarations, read-only property declarations, and expression body definitions. When naming properties, use a noun phrase, or an adjective. So good property names would be things like first name, last name, age. And again, we use the Pascal casing. Now, we should always begin the property name with a letter, sometimes an underscore, but try to stay away from that. I would always recommend starting out with a letter. After that, you can contain any amount of letters, numbers, and underscores that you want, and up to 255 characters for that property name. There are a couple different ways to declare properties. First is just a simple property declaration, also known as an auto property. And it looks like this. You put the access modifier public, the data type, the property name, and then within curly braces, get, semicolon, set, semicolon. This creates a property. It's all you need to do. However, sometimes it might be advantageous to use a full property declaration. And that looks like this, where you create a private variable known as the backing field, private decimal underscore list price. And kind of the convention is when you are using private variables within a class is to prefix that variable name with an underscore. Then we have our property get and set syntax, which is public decimal list price. Then within curly braces, we have a get. Within curly braces, you return underscore list price. So you're returning the value in that private field. Or in the set, you are setting the underscore list price private field equal to value. Now, value is a keyword. It's where .NET passes the value to you that you are using to set this particular property. To illustrate classes and properties, let's first create a console application. We're going to create an instance of Visual Studio 2022 here. So we click on that in our search window here in Windows. We then create a new project. And now you want to find the console application. Now, type in console app here, and you should see all the different console apps come up. Make sure you choose the one that is a project for creating command line applications that can run on .NET on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. Click the Next button. Type in your project name and the location of where you want to put that particular project. I'm just going to put it in my d:\samples folder. And I like placing the solution and the project in the same directory, but again, totally up to you. And then click Next. Here you should make sure you're choosing .NET 6 long-term support, or if you have a later one like .NET 7 or .NET 8, you can use that as well. So let's go ahead and create this. And we now have our console application to which we can start adding classes with properties and methods. Let's now do a demo of creating a product class and creating an auto property. Right mouse click on the project, select Add, Class, and then type in Product. So this will give us a template that Microsoft has defined. It already has a set of using statements, which allows us to bring in libraries or classes from another namespace, but we are not going to need any of those right now for this. We also have a simplified syntax now for the namespace. We can simply do namespace C#samples semicolon. We don't have to then wrap everything within curly braces. But it does mean that everything within this file is going to be under the same namespace. I'm going to go ahead and create a public class here called product. Then I can add a couple of properties. And I'm going to use prop, and this is a code snippet. Prop, and I hit tab twice. And I can now hit tab. I'm going to leave it as an int. And I can simply type in my first property name. Go to the end of the line, hit enter. And then look at this. Visual Studio 2022 actually gives you hints. It says, well, maybe if you're creating this, you might want a name. Well, actually I do. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Tab and let it do that. But I am going to change it just to simply name and not product name. As you can see here, I'm getting a little squiggly here that says non-nullable property name must contain a non-null value when exiting the constructor. What does this mean? It just means that they want you to initialize name. This is new in .NET 6 where they changed this. They've always had this capability, well, they've had the capability for quite a while to enable global nullables, but we're going to go ahead and disable that. I'm going to go into the properties of the project. I'm going to go to the build and I'm going to find this nullable and I'm going to disable that nullable. So what happens when I go back to product now, we no longer see that it is complaining about that. Now this is a personal preference again, totally up to you whether you want to use this process or not. Let's now open the program.cs. If you remember, I created my product class under the namespace C#samples, so I'm going to go ahead and do a using on that in program.cs. That way I can now use product. It'll show up. And you can see Visual Studio giving me help here, but I can do this completely myself if I want. In fact, I like using the new shorthand. I like that a lot. Then we're going to do entity.name is equal to, well, let's see, we'll do, how about a helmet? We're going to talk about bikes here. And then I'm going to do the product ID. We'll set it equal to 1. And then I can do some console.writelines on entity.product ID. I could do a console writeline on the entity. And then I could do like this, where I simply put a space and a dash in between the product ID and the name. And if I now run this, we will see that I now have an object that is holding on to that data. So what I might want to do here is change these to rights. And then when I run this, look at that. It's all on one line. I have a 1, that's the product ID, a dash, and then the name, which is the helmet. Let's now take a look at an alternate way to instantiate and initialize that product object. If you look on line 3, you see the little dots underneath the new. If you hover over that, it'll tell you that the object initialization can be simplified, and it will then show you potential fixes. So you can see right here, it shows you what it is right now, and it shows you what Visual Studio can refactor this to. I'm going to go ahead and fix all occurrences in this document. I will then apply that, and you can see that this is another way to basically initialize an object. You don't have to create it new on a separate line and then do entity dot, entity dot, entity dot. You can do it all within technically one line of code here. Let's now take a look at creating a full property declaration. Let's go back to the product class, add another line, but this time let's do the snippet prop full. When you do that and you hit tab twice, it now says, okay, give me the data type that you wish for this. I'm going to use a decimal. I'm going to hit tab twice again. And you can see it changed it on line 6 and on line 8. It then says my var. So I'm going to replace that with standard cost. I'm going to hit tab and notice it changes then the same ones on lines 10 and 11 to whatever I just typed in. And my cursor is now over my property on line 8. So now I can just type in standard cost. Hit enter and you're now out of the snippet mode. I'll do another one, prop full, tab, tab, decimal, tab, tab, underscore, list price, tab, list price, enter. So now I've created a backing field. One's called standard cost, one's called list price, and then I have my property declaration. So on line 8, public decimal standard cost, and then on line 10, I return that private backing field underscore standard cost, and on line 11 is where I set that. Let's now go back to Program.CS and use these. So now I can come in here and type in standard cost is equal to $2.99 and list price is equal to $6.99. Use the M to signify decimal, of course. And now if we just add a couple of additional console.write lines, and look at that, isn't that nice how Visual Studio does that for you? Now we will get those values. But here's the thing, when you are saying take this $2.99 decimal value, when it's on the right side of the equal sign, what it does is it calls the set here. That $2.99 is passed a value. You can see how it's in blue here. Okay, so that value is $2.99. That is then assigned to the private backing field standard cost. Same thing with the list price. If I run this, we now see those values. Every now and then, you might wish to have a read-only property. You don't want the user to set that property directly. Maybe they have to do it through a method, or some other method is going to set that property. Well, we can create read-only properties. Go back to the product class, do a prop full, type in decimal, and underscore profit, and then hit tab again. And then we'll do profit and hit enter. But now what we're going to do is remove the setter. We don't need the setter. This is now a read-only property. So what do we do with this though? How would this get set? Well, if you think about it, to calculate the profit, you take the list price minus the standard cost. And this is why you sometimes want to use the full property syntax, so you can add code to perform a calculation. Because now what we can do is we can set the profit equal to the list price minus the standard cost. And we can do that here when the list price is set, and we can do it here when the standard cost is set as well. That is how you then assign to a read-only variable. If we go back to our Program.CS and we add yet another console.write line and we say let's spit out the profit. Let's go ahead and add a toString on this and we'll format that as a currency. Now when we run this, we see the profit. Let's take a look at one more way of expressing properties, and that's with an expression body definition. Let's go back to our product class. Let's actually remove this line right here that we put into each of our full properties. What I can do now is on this public decimal profit, I can actually specify that I want it to be list price minus standard cost. So what I'm saying here is that this is a public decimal profit. It's a property. And I'm using the arrow syntax because all I need to do is do one line of code. If you have just a single line of code that you're using to calculate and it's going to return something, you can use the arrow syntax like this. That's pretty neat. So now if we go ahead and run this again, we see the exact same result, but much less code. And that's always a good thing. In this lesson, you created a simple property declaration. You then added full property declarations to that same product class. You learned about read-only property declarations, and you created a property using an expression body definition. Up next, manipulate property data using methods.